Hey, Courage class! Welcome to the podcast. My name is Lindsay Kwok Hugh, and I am the creator and host of this podcast. Look, I know that you are incredibly busy, so anytime that I can get someone to sit down with me for 45 to 60 minutes of their day, I want to make sure that I am over-delivering on the content that I share with you. In addition to that, if you like what you heard on the podcast, can I ask you for a favor? Can you subscribe to the newsletter? I'll leave the link below. This is an opportunity to keep in touch on a weekly basis, and I like to think of it as a love letter in support of you. Thanks so much for being here. I truly appreciate the time that you spend to listen to Courage Class. Have a great week. Hi, Shuling.
Hi, Lindsay.
Thank you so much again for your time. I know I said that 1,000 million times when we were just chatting, but I really am, again, so grateful for your expertise, for your lived experience, and for what you're frankly going to teach us today about storytelling.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I want to just start off with your incredible career. I mean, you've dedicated much of your career to Asian and Asian American stories. And I'm just curious to hear from you, where did that commitment begin for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing 17 years. What a privilege to be able to tell people stories for a living. But in the documentary film community, we often ask ourselves a really important question before we even start projects, right?
Mm,
And that is, why am I the best person to tell this story?
mm,
Do I have a personal connection either to the people that whose stories that we're telling or the communities that they're a part of?
yeah.
And that's really important because when you have that personal connection with the community, you have a more nuanced view of the
Mm,
details. You'll take more care. You'll be more respectful of the community that you are entering, whose real lives you are essentially disrupting with a camera crew, coming
mm,
in.
yes.
And so I think for me as an Asian American filmmaker, it is part of my responsibility, but also my privilege to be able to uplift
Yes.
Asian American stories.
Absolutely. And indeed that is evident in not just your current work, but some of your previous work as well. And you said a really important word I want to ask you a follow-up question on. You said the word nuance and how you feel, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's like your responsibility to showcase that nuance. And what is the nuanced perspective that you are aiming to amplify whenever you delve into these stories?
I think whenever an audience watches a film, they can tell roughly whether the maker is familiar with all the details
Mm,
of what it means to have grown up in that space or in that community. The way you approach, is it like I'm this person in power and I've placed my camera here and
mm,
I'm just like taking up a lot of space, or am I here respecting your story and your needs and your wants? I think it makes a big difference.
yeah, and I feel like you're so mindful of that. I was watching, I apologize, I'm blanking on the name of the film right now, but it was the one where you,
Unteachable?
yes, how could I forget
Yeah.
that? And, I shared with you earlier that I was, a teacher who worked in an under-resourced area. I thought that you captured the teacher's struggle so beautifully. We have these mandates that come down, and just sort of the way you have to work with the student inside of the system and the beliefs. And there's so much you have to balance. It's not just about teaching what's on the page. I personally felt like you captured that so beautifully. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I can tell just personally how much care you approach your work. I'm curious to know, you grew up in Singapore.
Yes.
And now you're working in the US, obviously. And I'm curious to know if your relationship to your Asian identity has that evolved for you over time as a storyteller?
You're right. It certainly has evolved tremendously. Now,
Mm,
if you're not familiar with Singapore, if you look at the population makeup, just the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians put together make up 98% of the population. And so I spent the first 21 years of my life there being surrounded by people who look just like me. So my Asian identity was never really in my consciousness. And it wasn't until I came to the US in 2007, specifically to the Chicago area, where only 6% of the population identifies as Asian. And so I found myself being quite often the only person of color in the room. And that was just like a stark contrast to the way I grew up.
I bet.
And suddenly, like my Asianness
Mm-hmm.
became my identifying trait.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. And so along with that came a lot of like, the usual stereotypes or like the lack of information about what it means to be an Asian. Like, if I could count the number of times I've been told, "Oh, you speak really good English," or "Is Singapore in China? Which part of China is Singapore in?" Things like that. And so, as ironic as it may sound, it took me leaving Asia to feel more Asian.
That is so fascinating.
And I think early on in my time here in the US, I actually tried to downplay my Asian identity. I tried to blend in. I was really worried about discrimination. I even gave myself, an anglicized name. I thought about giving myself an anglicized name. Didn't end up doing it. But, it wasn't until sometime in the last like 12 to 13 years where minority groups started to organize themselves. We started building our collective power to raise our visibility, and that's when I really started to just like embrace my Asian identity.
I see.
Yeah, there were programs like, for example, there's a production company, a well-known documentary production company in Chicago called Cartoon Queen Films. They started a program called Diverse Voices in Docs, and I got to be part of the first cohort in 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are groups like Brown Girls Doc Mafia, Asian
Mm.
American Documentary Network, Mezcla Media Collective, all for like women of color or people of color. And so it was really great to meet other people who were just like me, doing the work that I care so much about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story. I mean, I find it so interesting. There's so much that, whether you are Asian or Asian American, that people, I think, are really going to resonate with your story. And I think that the first thing is um, sort of when you became conscious or aware, more aware of your Asianness upon moving to the US. Interesting because um, I think so many, well, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for the entire community. I felt like that has been the way in which I have grown up, just being really conscious and also downplaying that. So many of us are going to be able to identify with that. I just love that you were able to plug yourself into groups, and then it sounds as though just really cultivating and building up your voice. I'm curious to know, was there a moment when you realized that storytelling could be a form of social change?
Yeah, so I think back to my senior year in college,
Yeah.
where a filmmaker named Maria Finizzo came and visited. She screened her documentary film called Mapping Stem Cell Research, Terra Incognita in my class. And at that time, there was a big debate around stem cell research and whether it was ethical to harvest stem cells from unborn babies
Mm.
for scientific research. And the debate in the news was pretty heated, and there's a lot of it was based around like statistics and morals. But what the film did was center the story of this one professor and doctor in Northwestern University who had dedicated his life to doing this research to find a way for his daughter to walk again after
Oh,
she had lost her ability to walk in a ski accident.
oh my
And
God.
suddenly through that story, I was like, oh, it just puts a human face on these issues and why
Mhm.
people do what they do. And it was the first time I'd seen films and storytelling be used in such a way to really help you empathize and understand where
Yeah.
other people are coming from.
That's such a beautiful word to describe it, as like a process to cultivate empathy, and to actually apply that to a story. Because I agree. I think that when you can put a face to an issue, it has this very humanizing effect. Um, Thank you for sharing that. You know, Shuling, your work often, at least from my perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it lives at the intersection of culture, education, and equity. What do you think storytelling can do that maybe just policy by itself um, alone cannot?
Yeah, I believe in this work that you have to touch the heart
Mm,
before you can change the mind,
yeah.
right? And so similar to the way we look at data and facts, statistics, policy is also basically a set of words on a piece of paper
Mm,
that relies on somebody out there to monitor and enforce,
yeah.
right? It's kind of devoid of emotion. And so where on the flip side of that, storytelling is where you help people to connect on an emotional level.
Mm,
It's really helps you understand, the why of the why and the motivations behind the way people do things. It brings empathy to an issue. It
yeah.
helps you build understanding between different communities. And it also helps to create word of mouth because, good stories get shared.
Yes.
And so I think when you are trying to make positive change in the community, it does take a combination of both, the top down of policy making and the bottom up of storytelling to really drive like that kind of lasting systemic change.
Absolutely. When you talk about systemic change, I mean, as a storyteller, can you share what responsibility do you feel when when you are telling stories that are really rooted in community and people's lived experiences? Um, could you share a little bit about your process?
Yeah. So in participant care is something that I think about a lot.
Mm,
Before we even, show up to a space or somebody's home with a camera, it's important to build that relationship first
mm,
and to give a broad understanding of, what you hope to achieve with your project, why you're telling this, why you think their story is important to tell. And then also making sure that there is informed consent so that your
mm,
participant understands the potential impact of being in a film.
yes.
And making sure, because documentary films tend to take several years to finish, making
Okay.
sure that you check in along the way to to know that the consent is continuous.
Mm,
And then during the process itself, we make sure that we minimize our footprint. I don't come in with like 10 crew members and just like change the energy of the space. I try and move around, move around with like minimal impact to the environment and what's going on there. Um, and it's more of an observational method that I use. I
okay.
try to put in a lot of time to
Okay.
give people, that time and space to like adjust to my presence.
Sure.
And when it comes to the editing process, I try to organize like work in progress screenings, feedback screenings, give the participants a chance to watch their own stories and give feedback so that they can tell me whether or not they feel accurately and fairly represented. And if not, what are the things they hope to see adjusted.
Wow. Wow. I feel there's so much care and um, and generosity in that process that you offer the participant. I guess I always thought that you come in with sort of a story, an idea, a narrative, and then like it's seen through the lens of that narrative that has been sort of predefined ish for the participant. But I didn't hear that in your process at all. Like it was very important out the gate for you to have that relationship to build that. And then when you actually go in, you said you don't go in with 10 crew members, you go in with as few as possible to just sort of, you didn't say fly in the wall, but that's what kind of what I was imagining you to be. And then you have feedback sessions with the people that you are featuring. You have to have so much humility, I feel like, to be the type of documentarian that you are pursuing. or
I
that
mean,
you're
I'll admit
living?
it, it's certainly not easy, and it's the
Okay.
more time-consuming path, it's the more resource-intensive path,
Okay.
because certainly there are documentaries that exist where, a crew parachutes in for an hour, you get all the sound bites you need, and then you go quickly cut, your 3-minute piece, and that's it,
Okay.
right? Zero emotional investment or little emotional investment.
Yeah.
But the way in which I like to tell the stories in my films is, just slow and patient and, try and get things more as authentically as possible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it'll be worth it in the end. I think audiences can tell the difference.
When I think about it from a moral and ethical standpoint, it's so important for those who are being impacted by the storytelling, that they are very much a part of the process. I wonder, Shuling, if you would be willing to, for the person who is really, who's listening right now, who might be struggling to find their own story or their authentic self and to, share that with the world. Do you have any recommendations for them on how to do that in the most authentic and honest way?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really hard work. And if you don't feel passionate about what you're doing, then it's how do you create a good product?
Yeah.
So you think, I mean, if you're trying to find, what story should I tell? What story should I tell? You think about, your own identity, how you interact with the world, what injustices you might see out there.
It's really hard. Courage class, it's hard when you have been living a specific story your entire life and then to try to course correct and find authentically who you are and what is the narrative that you want to write for yourself. That's very difficult. And, your work takes it to the next level. We're going to talk about your work or your newest project. You just mentioned it. Talk about taking things to the next level. Could you tell us a little bit about this new project that you were working on that at Courage Class, we are thrilled to see something like this being put out into the ethosphere.
Absolutely. So I'm happy to share that I'm currently working on a new short documentary following two incredible public school teachers
Mm.
as they work to implement Asian American history in their classrooms. And this is after Illinois passed a bill that mandates teaching Asian American history in all public schools through what is known as the TEAACH Act.
Mm.
Now, the TEACH Act stands for Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History. So it's TEAACH.
Hmm.
And it passed in April of 2021. And it basically amended the Illinois school code, right? So the state wants schools to highlight the contributions of Asian Americans. So, not just people who came from Asia, but also the Asians who grew up and are living in America, and how they've contributed to the community, even with not leaving out specifically local examples of Asian Americans as well. So the Illinois,
Mm.
folks in Illinois who've made contributions to the community as well.
Which is
And so,
incredible.
yeah, it's amazing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so Governor Pritzker signed the bill in July 2023.
Okay. Okay. And so your work picks up after the bill has passed. Would you be willing to sort of give folks a peek into the documentary, where it is in the process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I followed two teachers. One is Miss Wiley. She is an eighth grade social studies teacher with 25 years of teaching experience. And she is not of Asian descent, but in her high school experience, she had somebody who is a survivor of Japanese incarceration visit her school and speak to them. And
Wow.
that experience was so profoundly life-changing for her that it sparked her interest in history, it sparked her interest in government, it inspired her to become a social studies teacher.
Wow.
And so when the TEACH Act passed, she was really excited to figure out how to do this well. And fortunately, the grassroots organization Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, um, after all the efforts of getting the bill passed was over, they turned their efforts over to developing resources that teachers can download for free to learn how to do this, how to implement it well. And so Ms. Wiley spent her summer
Wow.
attending professional development workshops on how to do this. And
Wow.
I got to had the privilege of filming the first time that she implemented this 6-week Asian American history unit in her 8th grade classroom at her elementary school.
What was that experience like for her?
Yeah, I mean, of course, she was nervous at first. She really wanted to do a good job, but
Yeah.
also she has a ton of teaching experience, right? And so she leaned in on her teaching expertise to say, hey, I know that I don't have all the answers.
Mm.
I'm going to make mistakes. We're going to learn together and it's okay. But she still devised, lessons and activities that were engaging to the students. And I think it worked out really well.
I'm curious to know, was the bill met with any resistance in Illinois? Were people surprised maybe at the multifaceted nature of, just Asian and Asian Americans in general, all of the different ways and stories? Um, was that a
Yeah,
surprise at all? Or
it's an interesting question. I mean,
yeah.
fortunately, Chicago's a little bit of a nice bubble to live in where,
Okay, fair.
diversity is embraced. But that said, the bill did not pass with any funding tied to it.
Okay.
And so the State Board of Education doesn't really have the capacity to monitor compliance across its
Interesting.
over 800 school districts in the
Mm,
state. Right. And so if you really think about it, implementation takes the dedication and the time commitment of individual teachers and school districts itself. The other challenging thing about the TEACH Act is it's very broad language. And so it says that schools have to teach a unit of Asian American history. What does a unit mean?
mm,
Is it a single day celebration where you make paper dragon puppets and you
uh-huh,
eat dumplings?
uh-huh,
Or
uh-huh.
is it, like in my other teacher's case, Mr. Lee, who teaches the Asian history class at Niles West High School, his class runs for 5 months, every day. So, yeah,
Yeah,
what does a unit of Asian American history mean?
interesting. Yes.
Yeah, how do we take it beyond what they call the 4 Fs, right? The food and the festivals, the
Yeah,
fashion and the festivities, I guess. Yeah.
that is
Or
so true.
folklore. Yeah.
Yes, that is so true. I'm curious to know what drew you to this story as a filmmaker. Um, particularly maybe at this moment in time, even.
Yeah. At that time, I was approached, and this was 2023, I was approached by the Asian American Documentary Network to make a short documentary about Asian Americans participating. In the community.
Mm,
And so during my research, when I found out about how the TEACH Act was passed, it was a group of community organizations led by Asian Americans Advancing Justice,
yeah.
basically a grassroots effort, ground up. And this bill was passed like just after there was that shooting incident in Atlanta,
Atlanta,
the
yeah.
Atlanta spa shootings, where like out of the 8 people who died, 6 of them were Asian American women. And
Hmm.
so it really sent like shockwaves through the community.
Yeah.
And I think as someone, who grew up with my parents telling me, to keep my head down, don't rock the
Hmm.
boat.
Hmm.
And, I grew up in Singapore too, where like activism is really discouraged.
Hmm.
And now I see this group of Asian Americans who've come together and done this amazing thing. I was just like feeling so proud.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my daughter it was her first year in Chicago public schools. She was the only Asian kid in her class. And I
Uh-huh.
was just like constantly thinking about how I can help her fully embrace her identity
Mm.
and help her thrive in community with her peers. And so the idea that, the TEACH Act was eventually going to impact my daughter in her public school
Oh, wow.
experience was just like so exciting.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I feel like I want to really highlight at least the learning that I'm walking away from your story with, sometimes as an Asian person, I think that it all has to be like my own sort of individual effort. Like, Lindsay, why couldn't you be louder? Why couldn't you do this? And part of it is individual, but I also want to just sort of highlight the context in which this incredible project got up off the ground. I mean, when you said 2023, that was like at the height of Stop AAPI hate, and you're right, like the Atlanta spa shootings had happened. I mean, and we were just coming out of the pandemic. There was a lot of cultural and social context that really sort of came like surrounded the initiative to really encourage this project to get up off the ground, for this grassroots efforts to really lobby for an Asian American unit, still to be determined what that is, like how long and what that is. Hopefully longer than a day. Then, like, your daughter entering public school, you being the lead on this is just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it comes from your incredible, you were the filmmaker that was asked to drive this. And that is not by accident, because of your incredible body of work, and the way in which you have sought to amplify community stories, not just in the Asian American community, in other communities as well. I mean, it's an incredible, to your point, grassroots effort, community effort, to bring this story to a commercially viable content.
Let's will it to happen.
Yes, we are going to totally will it to happen. But um, I think, as you were sharing that, I was thinking about, wow, I had no idea that there was so much context that surrounded the pushing of this incredible effort. And then ultimately the film, the making of the film. It's exciting. Where can folks see it? Let's just cut to the chase.
Well,
We want it
it's
to
been
get
it's
seen.
been a slow process, right?
Okay.
As you mentioned earlier, funding is difficult. And so thankfully the AAPI Voices grant with Cartemquin Films just came in a couple months ago. And so I've been able to finally hire an editor to work with me to shape
Okay.
this into a coherent, 20-minute piece. Um, my editor just started last week, so I'm very excited to be
Wow.
on this journey.
Yeah.
Um, and alongside with my so apart from this documentary, the AAPI versus Grant also funded like two other Asian American short storytellers, and so like the three of us together are going to. I think Kirk Quinn's going to try and organize the three films to like premiere together
Amazing.
sometime spring next year, I would think.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay. What do you
that
need?
is
What sort of resources do you need at this moment in time? If we can just put out a call to the Courage Class community.
I
If you-
mean, so part of, I believe that like making the film is only half the journey, right? So how do you use the film as a tool afterwards?
uh,
That is just as important. And part of my goal with telling the story is that, you know, I would love to reach teachers, that in seeing the stories of Miss Wiley and Mr. Lee and seeing how implementation could look,
mhm.
that they would feel inspired to implement a version or just try it in their own classes as
Yeah.
well to get over that initial uncertainty or fear of the unknown.
Mm.
And so part of the goal would be to get screenings, in schools with teachers, with students, and yeah, basically get this spread. Hopefully, Illinois will be a great model for replication in other states as well.
Yeah.
That would be just amazing.
Yeah. That would be incredible. We have quite a few, especially Asian American, majority, not majority Asian American school districts just in the state of California. And not only is this important for the Asian American community, it's important for all of us as Americans to know one another's stories. So, keep us posted certainly when the release date comes out, and we will advertise where folks can go and see it. You said next spring. So, yes, next spring, fingers crossed, it'll happen. The universe will it for sure, Shuling. Um, you talked briefly about the next generation by virtue of sharing that, your daughter would ultimately be impacted by this legislation. I'm just curious from your perspective as a mom, as a filmmaker, what do you want to, what do you want the next generation to feel when they watch this film?
I mean, if you know, if you're Asian American, there's something really powerful about seeing somebody like yourself on screen whose stories that you can personally relate to.
Mhm.
It gives you that feeling of you're not alone. Gives you the
Mhm.
feeling of I understand what you're going through. I think that's really incredible. And to know that your friends who might not come from the same community that you do, for them to know a little bit more about who you are and what you stand for, your identity. I think it can only make for a more harmonious, happier, understanding, caring society. Yeah. I can raise one example. Like in one of Miss Wiley's classes, they had just read an essay called The Perpetual Foreigner, written by an immigrant.
Yeah.
And, one of the questions Miss Wiley asked the students was like, what is the experience of an immigrant? And I was just blown away by how the students were able to articulate the challenges that
Mm.
immigrants face when they come into the country. They were able to put themselves in the shoes of how it might feel a little scary to not know where to go, not have people you can turn to, you might not speak the language. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, if the generation of people who are now, working in ICE had taken this class, like how
Mm.
different things might be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So true. That is such an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that maybe you would want to share with the community?
Maybe I'd love to highlight the resources that's available for
Please.
free. Yeah.
Yes, please.
AAAJ has created a wonderful free resource at the AAPIHistoryHub.org. It's
Mm.
available online. So I think anyone who's interested in getting, really robust curriculums or even resources to learn more about Asian American history, it's all there.
And we will be sure to put that website inside of the show notes and all of our marketing material. Can I ask you a final question? What is your definition of courage?
Well, if courage is not the absence of fear, but the taking of action
Mm.
despite the fear being present, then I would say Miss Wiley and Mr. Lee are great shining examples of courage.
Mm.
For them to pursue something, be among the first in the state to try it
Yeah,
with no guarantee of success. Um, I think that to me is courage.
that's amazing.